Have you ever felt that strange pull inside your spirit, as if something bigger than you wanted your attention right now? Maybe this isn't a random moment. Maybe you didn't click this video by accident. I believe God led you here, not because you were scrolling aimlessly, but because He's been watching the struggle behind your smile, the quiet anxiety every time you check your balance, the way your heart sinks when the bills arrive, and that hidden question you never say out loud: Lord, when will it finally change for me? Listen closely, because what you're about to hear might be the answer you've been praying for. Before we go any further, I want you to take a moment and declare this truth in faith. Write this in the comments: I trust God with my finances. That single sentence could be the first act of surrender that opens a door no human effort ever could. You see, there was a time when I thought I had everything figured out. I tracked every expense, chased every opportunity, and still, peace never came. My plans always seemed one step behind my problems. I was working harder than ever, yet feeling emptier than before. And in that exhaustion, God whispered something I'll never forget. If you want me to move, you need to step aside. Those words shattered me because they exposed the truth. I wanted God to bless my plans, not build His plan through me. I was managing my money, but I wasn't letting Him lead it. That night, I prayed a different kind of prayer. I didn't ask for a miracle check in the mail or a sudden promotion. I simply said, Father, teach me how to handle what already belongs to you. It was the first time I saw my finances for what they really were, not mine to control, but tools entrusted to me by heaven. That small shift changed everything, because when you stop trying to be the master of your money and start becoming its steward under God, you begin to see blessings where you once saw burdens. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what do you want to do through me? Let's be honest. Trusting God with money feels terrifying. The world tells you that control is safety, that your worth is measured by what's in your account. But the kingdom works differently. God's economy begins where human certainty ends. I didn't learn that in a sermon or a book. I learned it standing in a grocery store line, praying my card wouldn't decline. I learned it in nights of silence, when the math didn't add up and fear whispered louder than faith. And I learned it again when, instead of panic, I chose to say, God, I still trust you. Each time I released control, He provided in ways I couldn't have imagined. Not instantly, not always the way I expected, but perfectly, in His timing. That's why you're here right now, because God wants to teach you that same surrender. Not the kind that gives up, but the kind that gives over. The kind that says, Lord, I'll do my part, but I'll let you decide the outcome. When I finally stopped managing my money and let God take over, I didn't lose control. I found peace. I didn't become careless. I became careful with purpose, and slowly the weight lifted, doors opened, opportunities aligned. That's the power of divine order. When God becomes the CEO of your finances, you stop chasing survival and start walking in stewardship. So if you're still here, it's not random. It's an invitation, because somewhere inside you, there's a quiet knowing that God has been trying to lead you, not just toward financial provision, but toward freedom. And if you stay with me until the end, I believe your understanding of money, faith, and trust will never be the same again. And when I first whispered that prayer, Father, teach me how to handle what already belongs to you, I didn't realize how much He would have to unlearn in me before He could rebuild. Because I wasn't just handing over my finances, I was handing over my pride. The part of me that believed I had to figure everything out. The part that thought my value was measured by how much I could earn or how quickly I could fix things. God doesn't just want your budget, He wants your belief system. And when He begins to reshape it, it's uncomfortable. For months, I felt like everything was being stripped away. Old habits, old mentalities, even friendships that kept me bound to a lifestyle of comparison. At first, I thought I was losing, but now I know God was pruning. He was cutting away everything that made me depend on myself more than Him. Every time I looked at my account and felt fear rise, He would whisper, "Do you trust me now?" And some days, my answer was barely a whisper back, "I'm trying, Lord." You see, trusting God with your finances isn't about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about walking with faith while holding nothing back. It's waking up and saying, "God, this day, this job, this paycheck, it's yours. Show me how to use it the way you would." At first, that prayer felt small, but something changed inside me. I stopped seeing money as a measure of security and started seeing it as a message of stewardship. Money became a test, not of my success, but of my surrender. One morning during my devotion, I felt God say something that completely redefined how I view provision. "I'm not trying to make you rich, I'm trying to make you trustworthy." Those words sank deep, because for years, I was chasing wealth while ignoring wisdom. I was asking for abundance while living out of anxiety. And God knew if He gave me what I was praying for too soon, it would have destroyed me. So instead of multiplying my income, He multiplied my understanding. He began teaching me principles I had overlooked in His Word, verses like Proverbs 10:22. "The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and He adds no sorrow with it." I had read that verse before, but for the first time, I understood it wasn't about the size of the blessing, but the peace that comes with it. What good is success if it steals your joy? What good is abundance if it costs your peace? God was showing me that financial peace doesn't begin with more money. It begins with more trust. Because the moment you stop trying to control everything, heaven can finally breathe on what you have. There were nights when I would sit with bills spread across my table, anxiety tight in my chest, and I'd hear that gentle reminder, "Didn't I take care of you yesterday?" And I'd nod, sometimes through tears, because yes, He had. Every single time. That's when I realized God had never failed me. I had simply stopped noticing His faithfulness in the small things. The groceries that lasted longer than they should have. The unexpected discount. The friend who sent help just when I needed it most. None of it was random. It was divine provision disguised as ordinary life. When you start recognizing those moments, gratitude replaces panic. And gratitude in the kingdom is the currency of multiplication. The more thankful I became, the more doors began to open. Not magically, but naturally through alignment. I started giving without fear, and somehow there was always enough left over. Opportunities came that I didn't chase. Clients called that I didn't pitch. Ideas flourished that I'd buried years ago. And through it all, one truth became clear. When you put God first in your finances, you don't lose control. You gain clarity, because He never wastes your obedience. But let me be honest. Surrender wasn't glamorous. There were days I questioned if I'd made a mistake. Moments when I looked at others, thriving, growing, traveling, and thought, why not me yet? And God, in His patience, would remind me, because I'm not building a lifestyle, I'm building your faith. Faith that wouldn't collapse when the numbers didn't make sense. Faith that could give even when it hurt. Faith that could sleep in peace, knowing that the provider never runs out. That's when I began to understand the real difference between provision and prosperity. Provision is God giving you what you need. Prosperity is God trusting you with more because He knows you'll handle it wisely. So if you feel stuck right now, if your finances look dry, if your prayers feel unanswered, maybe God isn't withholding. Maybe He's preparing you to be the kind of person who can be blessed without breaking, preparing you to hold more without losing sight of Him. Because sometimes, before God blesses your bank account, He'll test your heart. He'll ask, can I trust you to give when I ask? Can I trust you to stay generous when I increase you? That's where many people stop, right at the edge of breakthrough. They think God is silent, but in reality, He's waiting for a shift, not in their finances, but in their faith. I know because I was one of them. I was waiting for God to pour out while He was waiting for me to pour in, with obedience, with gratitude, with surrender. And once that clicked, everything changed. From that moment on, I made a simple vow. No more panic, no more striving. I will work, yes, but I will not worry. Because worry doesn't move heaven, faith does. If you're still listening, maybe God is whispering the same thing to you. Stop managing everything in your own strength. Stop chasing peace through numbers. Let Him take over, and when you do, you'll find something better than success. You'll find rest, because the same God who made the heavens also holds your bills, your dreams, and your tomorrow. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll share how God began turning that surrender into supernatural transformation, step by step, and how the same can happen in your life, starting today. The turning point didn't arrive with a miracle deposit or a sudden raise. It came quietly, through conviction, correction, and countless small obediences that tested everything I thought I knew about faith and finance. I remember sitting in prayer one night, frustrated and confused. I'd already surrendered my plans, yet the numbers still looked impossible. I asked God, if I've given you everything, why does it still feel like I'm waiting? And in the stillness, I felt Him answer, because I'm teaching you to walk by faith, not by spreadsheets. That single sentence became the foundation of my transformation. Because God wasn't asking me to ignore wisdom, He was teaching me to see it through revelation. There's a difference between managing money with logic and managing it with light. Logic says, save when there's extra. Light says, be faithful with the little, and I will make you ruler over much. Logic says, invest where it seems secure. Light says, plant your seed where I tell you, even if the soil looks barren. I started realizing that obedience is the highest form of financial intelligence in God's kingdom. So I tested it. I began giving even when it hurt. At first, it felt irresponsible, like I was giving away what I couldn't afford to lose. But that's the paradox of faith. You never lose what you give under God's instruction. You multiply it. Every time I gave, peace replaced fear. And peace, I discovered, is heaven's receipt that your transaction has been approved. Weeks later, unexpected opportunities began to surface. A client I'd forgotten about reached out with new work. A small idea I'd once dismissed began generating income. A debt that felt permanent was suddenly settled. I didn't call it luck. I called it alignment, because when you walk in obedience, doors open without forcing them. And when God opens a door, no market, no inflation, no economy can shut it. I started tracking not just my income, but my impact. Each dollar now carried an assignment. I asked, Lord, who needs this more than I do? There were moments when I'd bless someone anonymously. An elderly neighbor struggling with groceries, a single mother trying to pay rent, and every time, provision found its way back to me in a form I couldn't predict. That's when I learned the divine equation of generosity. Giving doesn't subtract. It circulates. You can't outgive the God who owns it all. And as I gave, something even greater began to shift: my identity. I was no longer the person who feared lack. I was becoming the person heaven could trust with overflow. Because God doesn't bless us to build empires. He blesses us to become evidence. Evidence that faith still works. Evidence that obedience still unlocks abundance. Evidence that surrender doesn't weaken you. It positions you for supernatural strength. I began writing verses on sticky notes and placing them where I'd see them every morning. Verses like Philippians 4:19, and my God will supply all your needs according to His riches in glory in Christ Jesus, and 2 Corinthians 9:8. God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Those weren't decorations, they were declarations. Each morning I'd read them out loud, even when my circumstances didn't reflect them, because speaking God's promises trains your soul to believe, before you see. Little by little, my life began to look like the verses I was declaring. My finances stabilized. My relationships healed. Opportunities came with peace attached instead of pressure. And the most beautiful part? I didn't feel like I was chasing money anymore. Money started following purpose. That's the hidden principle few understand. When your purpose becomes bigger than your paycheck, God trusts you with more because He knows the money won't own you. It'll serve His mission through you. That's why Jesus said in Luke 16:10, "Whoever is faithful with very little will also be faithful with much." It's not about the amount. It's about the attitude. Faithfulness is the currency of promotion in heaven's economy. And I realized the way you treat a single dollar is the way you treat a million. From that day, I started managing what I had with reverence, not resentment. I built a simple habit before spending. I'd pause and ask, "Lord, is this wise? Does this honor you?" That small pause became a spiritual checkpoint that saved me from countless wrong decisions. Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it was wait. Sometimes it was no. But every time, obedience brought peace, and that peace became my new prosperity. So if you're listening to this and wondering how to begin, start there. Don't wait for a raise, a bonus, or a miracle deposit. Start with trust. Start with gratitude. Start by writing it right now in the comments, "I trust God with my finances," because that declaration isn't just a phrase, it's a seed. And every seed you plant in faith grows into a testimony you'll one day tell. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll share how God used that season of obedience to build not only abundance, but purpose-driven prosperity, the kind that changes generations, not just bank accounts. When I finally understood that God's goal wasn't just to bless me, but to build me, everything began to shift. Because real prosperity is not measured by numbers, it's measured by impact. For the first time in my life, my home felt different. The atmosphere was lighter. Conversations changed. Instead of arguments about bills, we began praying over them. Instead of worrying about the next payment, we started thanking God for the provision that hadn't even arrived yet. Something happens when faith enters your finances. Anxiety loses its authority. You begin to live from a place of peace instead of panic, from gratitude instead of fear. One morning, while reading Proverbs 11:25, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." I realized that wealth was never meant to stop with me. It was meant to flow through me. That verse became the blueprint of my new life. I started looking at money differently, not as a measure of success, but as a ministry tool. Every dollar was a soldier, every investment a mission. And the more I aligned my resources with God's purpose, the more doors opened, not just financially, but spiritually. People began reaching out saying, "Your story encouraged me to trust God again." Friends who once mocked my faith started asking for prayer. My family, who used to doubt that obedience could lead to abundance, began to witness it firsthand. That's when I realized true prosperity doesn't make you proud, it makes you useful. Because when God blesses you, it's never for accumulation, it's for assignment. He doesn't give so you can boast. He gives so you can build lives, build hope, build testimonies that point back to Him. Over time, I began mentoring others on the same journey, not with business formulas, but with biblical foundations. I shared the truths that rebuilt my own life. God is the source, not the supplement. He's not an emergency fund for when everything falls apart. He's the architect of abundance when you invite Him in from the start. Stewardship is worship. Every decision, from how you spend to how you save, is a reflection of who you trust. When you manage money with integrity, heaven notices. Generosity is strategy. The world says, hold tight to what you earn. God says, release what you can and watch what I'll return. Because the moment your hand opens, so does the flow of blessing. Discipline is deliverance. Many people pray for financial miracles while ignoring financial order. But divine blessing always follows divine structure. Budgeting isn't fear, it's faith in action. These weren't abstract lessons. They became a daily rhythm. Every paycheck was prayed over. Every expense was reviewed with gratitude. Every act of generosity became a declaration of faith. And slowly, abundance became normal. Not the kind that shouts luxury, but the kind that whispers peace. Because the richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one with the least worry. That's when the overflow began to touch others. We helped fund missions, support small ministries, sponsor families in need. Each act reminded me, when you let God manage your money, He multiplies more than numbers. He multiplies purpose. But don't misunderstand this. Trusting God with your finances doesn't mean every season will be easy. There will still be tests. There will still be moments when the bank account doesn't match the promise. Yet those moments aren't signs of abandonment. They're invitations to believe again. Because faith that's never tested can't be trusted. I remember one night when an unexpected expense drained nearly everything we had saved. I felt the old fear trying to return, that familiar panic whispering, "You're back to zero." But deep inside, a louder truth rose up. If God provided before, He'll do it again. And He did, in ways I couldn't have planned, through people I never expected. Provision came not because I begged for it, but because I believed for it. That's how I learned that abundance is not an event. It's a mindset. A mindset that refuses to bow to scarcity. A mindset that wakes up each morning declaring, "God is my provider. Not my job, not my clients, not my skills, God." When that truth finally takes root, your entire relationship with money transforms. You stop chasing blessing and start carrying it. You stop surviving and start stewarding. And every blessing that flows through your hands leaves traces of heaven wherever it goes. Now looking back, I see how every struggle had purpose. Every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every moment of surrender. They were all chapters of a bigger story. The story of a God who teaches His children not just how to earn, but how to trust. And that's what He wants for you. Not a life free from challenges, but a heart free from fear. Because when you truly let God lead your finances, you don't just gain stability, you gain strategy from heaven. So wherever you are right now, whether you're rebuilding, starting over, or just learning to breathe again, remember this: your faith is worth more than your balance. And the same God who multiplied loaves and fish can multiply peace, provision, and purpose in your life too. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll share how this faith-led transformation became a generational blessing. How trusting God financially didn't just change my situation, but my entire family's destiny. When I look back now, I realize God was never just blessing me. He was rewriting a family story that had been marked by fear for generations. In my childhood, money was always a whisper, a source of tension. I grew up watching my parents stretch every dollar, holding their breath until payday, repeating the same phrase again and again, "Maybe next month will be better." That mindset settled deep in me. It taught me to chase stability, not purpose. So when God began breaking those patterns, He wasn't just changing my budget. He was breaking generational bondage. I remember the first time I paid off a debt completely. It wasn't the number that made me cry. It was the silence afterward. That silence felt holy, because for the first time, the weight that had rested on my family for decades was gone. And I knew that moment would echo beyond me. God doesn't just deliver individuals, He delivers lineages. When you choose faith over fear, obedience over anxiety, you plant seeds your children will one day harvest. That's why Proverbs 13:22 says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." It's not only about financial inheritance, it's about spiritual infrastructure. It's about teaching the next generation what true wealth really is. Peace that can't be stolen, wisdom that can't be taxed, faith that can't be shaken. I started talking to my family differently. Instead of saying, "We can't afford that," I began saying, "Let's pray for God's timing." Instead of saying, "We're in lack," I declared, "We're in training," because words build worlds. And I refused to let fear shape ours anymore. Soon, My family started to see what faith could do. My parents, once afraid to retire, finally rested, not because of my income, but because of the peace of knowing we were covered. My children began to pray over their allowance. They'd say, "Daddy, let's give some to church so God can multiply it." And every time, their little acts of generosity brought blessings I couldn't have planned. Scholarships, new opportunities, divine connections. That's when I understood that obedience creates a ripple effect. Your surrender today can become your child's stability tomorrow. Because God's blessings are generational by design. He never meant for faith to end with you, and here's the truth many overlook. Wealth without wisdom is wasted, but wisdom with worship builds legacy. So I began teaching biblical principles at home. Principle 1, ownership belongs to God. Every resource in our hands is borrowed grace. Treat it with humility. Principle 2, generosity is protection. The moment you give, greed loses its grip on your family line. Principle 3, gratitude is strategy. Families who thank God before the blessing arrives are the ones prepared to receive it. Those simple principles became our household culture. And slowly, what began as my personal transformation became our family's tradition. We no longer fear tomorrow. We prepare for it with peace. We no longer chase money. We chase mission. And our home has become what God always intended it to be, a lighthouse of faith. I often think about future generations, children I'll never meet, living under blessings I'll never see, and I smile, because I know the sacrifices of today are building their foundation. That's the beauty of trusting God with your finances. You start the miracle, but He finishes it through those who come after you. He multiplies the obedience you offer now into outcomes you may never witness. So if you're listening and your family has lived under financial fear, hear this clearly. It ends with you. The cycle breaks when faith begins. The curse stops when obedience starts. Your trust in God today can rewrite your family's tomorrow. Say it out loud. Declare it in faith. Write it in the comments. My family will live under God's blessing. Because that's not just a sentence, it's a prophecy. And the moment you believe it, heaven begins to arrange it. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll reveal how this generational shift led to something even greater. How walking in divine stewardship unlocked peace, purpose, and supernatural favor in every area of life. There comes a moment in every believer's life when peace finally replaces striving. For me, that moment didn't arrive in a sudden miracle. It arrived in quiet consistency. Every morning I'd wake up, whisper a prayer of gratitude, and choose to believe that heaven was already moving, even when I couldn't see it. Little by little, I began to notice it, God's fingerprints in every corner of my life. A closed door that used to frustrate me now felt like protection. A delay that once made me anxious now felt like divine timing. Favor wasn't just showing up in my finances. It was flooding into my relationships, my creativity, my health, and my peace of mind. Because when you surrender one area fully to God, He begins to restore them all. That's the nature of His favor. It doesn't visit one room. It fills the whole house. I started receiving ideas that seemed too big for me. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere, not because I chased them, but because I was finally walking in alignment. People began to say, "There's something different about you." And I'd smile, because the truth was simple. I had stopped managing and started trusting. That's what divine favor looks like. Quiet confidence wrapped in grace. It's walking into rooms you once felt unqualified for and realizing God prepared the seat long before you arrived. It's seeing every challenge as a setup for testimony. It's the supernatural peace that whispers, "Even this is working for your good." Psalm 84:11 says, "The Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does He withhold from those who walk uprightly." I read that verse again and again until it rewired my thinking. Favor isn't luck, it's alignment with heaven's order. It's the evidence that obedience never goes unnoticed. And if you've been waiting for a sign that God still sees you, this is it. He hasn't forgotten your prayers. He hasn't ignored your tears. He's been preparing you for a season where peace and provision will meet. So right now, breathe and say it out loud. God's favor is covering my life. Write it in the comments. Speak it in your home. Declare it over your family. Because every declaration plants a seed of expectation, and expectation is the language of faith. The more I declared it, the more I saw it. Favor in timing, favor in protection, favor in ideas that turned into impact. And through it all, one truth became unshakable. God's favor doesn't just find you. It follows you. It follows you into meetings, into decisions, into moments of uncertainty. It surrounds you like a shield, turning even the setbacks into setups. And once you've tasted that kind of grace, you never want to live without it again. As I look back on this entire journey, from fear to freedom, from control to surrender, I can see the pattern of divine fingerprints leading me every step of the way. What started as a financial breakthrough became a life transformation. And I believe that's exactly what God wants to do for you. Not just add blessings to your account, but restore balance to your soul. Not just fill your hands, but heal your heart. So stay with me, because in the final part of this message, we'll bring it all together, the surrender, the faith, the transformation, and I'll show you how to live in this flow of divine favor every single day. If you've made it this far, it's not coincidence, it's confirmation. You've just walked through a testimony that mirrors what God is ready to do in your life right now. Maybe you came here feeling tired, anxious, or uncertain about the future. But somewhere between these words, peace started to settle over you. That's not emotion. That's His presence. The same God who carried me out of debt. Doubt and fear is standing beside you in this very moment. He's whispering, "Let me lead." Because when you let Him lead, you don't lose control. You gain direction. You don't give up freedom, you discover it. So as this message comes to a close, take a deep breath and say it one more time, not as repetition, but as revelation. I trust God with my finances. Let that declaration echo through your home, through your thoughts, through every decision that lies ahead. Because faith doesn't end when the video stops. That's where it begins. Maybe today is the day you finally stop carrying it alone. Maybe this is the moment you hand over the worry, the stress, the constant pressure to figure it all out, and simply say, "Lord, it's yours, and I promise you, when you do, the same peace that met me in my lowest moments will meet you too." From now on, whenever you face uncertainty, remember this: God is not limited by numbers. He's moved by faith, and as long as you walk in trust, you'll never walk in lack. Before you leave, take a second to declare your faith in the comments. Write, "God's favor is covering my life," because every person who reads it might be the one who needed that reminder today. If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who's been praying for a breakthrough. You could be the answer to their prayer. This is Messiah Speaks, and together we are building a community of faith, wisdom, and divine prosperity. Until next time, keep walking in obedience. Keep believing even when you can't see, and never forget. When you let God take over, His plans will always lead you further than your own.